Daniel had always been the smart one in his family, the one everyone bragged about at gatherings, the one who made his immigrant parents feel like all their sacrifices had been worth it. He graduated top of his class in high school, got a full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country, and by the time he was 24, he was already making more money than both his parents combined at a prestigious consulting firm in the city. His mother would call her sisters back home and tell them about her son who wore suits to work and had business cards with fancy titles. His father, who had worked construction jobs for 30 years, would show Daniel's university degree to anyone who visited their small house. His younger brother and sister looked at him like he was some kind of superhero who had figured out the secret to life. Everything Daniel touched seemed to turn to gold. Promotions came easily. His bosses loved him. He drove a nice car, lived in a downtown apartment, and dated someone his mother approved of. Life was exactly how everyone had imagined it would be for him, but Daniel had this feeling inside him that wouldn't go away. He'd sit in those long meetings, listening to people talk about profit margins and market strategies, and wonder if this was really it. Was this what he'd worked so hard for? To spend his days making rich companies even richer? Then he met his old college roommate for coffee one Saturday afternoon. They got talking about an idea. A real idea. Something that could actually help people. They wanted to create an online platform that would make education accessible to everyone, especially people who couldn't afford expensive courses or didn't have time to go back to school. People like Daniel's own parents who had always wanted to learn more but never had the chance. The more they talked, the more excited Daniel became. This wasn't just about making money. This was about changing lives. This was about doing something that mattered. So at 28 years old, Daniel did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He quit his job, just like that. Walked away from the six-figure salary, the corner office, the career path that had been laid out so perfectly in front of him. His father didn't speak to him for 3 days after he told them. His mother cried, asking what they had done wrong, why their son was throwing his life away. His girlfriend left him, saying she couldn't be with someone so irresponsible. His former colleagues thought he'd lost his mind, but Daniel didn't care. He had a vision. He had passion. He had his college roommate who believed in the idea just as much as he did. Together they were going to build something amazing. He emptied his savings account. Every penny he'd carefully put away, every bonus he'd saved, every dollar his grandmother had given him over the years. All of it went into this company. He moved out of his nice apartment and into a cramped studio to save money. He stopped going out, stopped buying new clothes, stopped doing anything that didn't directly help the business. For 2 years, Daniel lived and breathed this startup. He worked 18-hour days. He learned to code, to design, to market, to sell. He pitched to investors who mostly said no. He dealt with technical problems that kept him up all night. He handled customer complaints, fixed bugs, rewrote entire sections of code. His roommate and co-founder was there too, working just as hard. They were partners, or so Daniel thought. They were building this dream together, but dreams don't always work out the way you plan. The market wasn't ready for what they were offering. The timing was wrong. People weren't signing up the way they'd projected. Money started running out faster than they could bring it in. Investors who had seemed interested suddenly stopped returning calls. Then came the worst part. Daniel and his co-founder started disagreeing about everything. About the direction of the company. About how to spend what little money they had left. About who was working harder. About who deserved more credit. Small disagreements turned into big arguments. Big arguments turned into shouting matches. One day his co-founder just quit, packed up his laptop and left, taking half their connections and potential investors with him. The partnership was over. The friendship was destroyed. Daniel tried to keep going alone, but it was too late. The company was drowning in debt. There were no more funds to keep it running. No more options to explore. After 2 years of his life and every dollar he had, Daniel had to shut it all down. He was 30 years old, completely broke, and back in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house. The Golden Boy had crashed and burned spectacularly. The whispers started immediately. Former colleagues would see him at the grocery store and suddenly find something very interesting to look at in the other direction. Relatives at family gatherings would ask his siblings about their lives, but somehow forget to ask Daniel anything at all. When they did talk to him, it was always the same question, delivered with a mixture of pity and judgment. "So when are you going to get a real job again?" His father barely looked at him at dinner. His mother tried to be supportive, but Daniel could see the disappointment in her eyes. The son they had bragged about was now the son they didn't know how to talk about. Friends stopped inviting him to things. His ex-girlfriend got engaged to someone with a stable career. Former classmates were buying houses and getting promoted while Daniel was sleeping in a twin bed, surrounded by his high school trophies. Every morning, he'd wake up in that small room and feel the weight of failure pressing down on his chest. He'd send out job applications and get rejected or ignored. The gap in his resume was like a red flag that screamed risky hire. Companies either wanted to pay him entry-level wages or didn't want him at all. Daniel had gone from being the success story everyone admired to being the cautionary tale parents told their kids. See what happens when you get too big for your britches? See what happens when you throw away a good thing? He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his childhood bedroom, wondering how everything had gone so wrong, wondering if he'd ever get another chance, wondering if he even deserved one. The months after his startup collapsed were the hardest of Daniel's life, not just because he was broke, not just because he'd failed, but because he felt like he'd become invisible. He'd wake up around noon most days, not because he was lazy, but because what was the point of getting up? He'd sit at his old desk, the one he'd done homework at as a teenager, and scroll through job listings until the words blurred together. Entry level. 5 years experience required. Sorry, we've decided to move forward with other candidates. His mother would knock softly on his door around dinner time. "Beta, I made your favorite," she'd say gently. But Daniel couldn't face sitting at that table, seeing the empty chair where the successful version of himself used to sit. So she'd leave a plate outside his door and he'd eat it cold hours later, alone in the dark. Some days were worse than others. There were mornings when he couldn't even get out of bed. When the thought of facing another rejection email, another pitying look, another "what happened to you" conversation felt like too much to bear. He'd pull the covers over his head and just disappear into sleep, because at least in sleep he didn't have to be the failure. His younger brother tried to cheer him up, invited him to hang out with friends, but Daniel couldn't do it. Couldn't sit there and listen to everyone talk about their jobs, their plans, their futures, while he had nothing to contribute except a story about how he'd thrown everything away. The savings account showed $243. That was it. That was all he had left from years of working, from that promising career, from all those careful choices. He'd gambled it all and lost. One night around 3 a.m, Daniel couldn't sleep. The anxiety was eating at him, the what-ifs and should-haves playing on repeat in his mind. He got up and turned on the small desk lamp, the same one he'd used to study for his high school exams. Next to it was an old notebook from college, the kind with the black and white spotted cover. He opened it to a blank page and just started writing. Not a business plan, not a pitch deck, just the truth. The painful, embarrassing, brutal truth about why his company had failed. He wrote about how he'd ignored the customers who told him the product was too complicated, how he'd insisted he knew better because he'd gone to a good school and worked at a fancy firm. He wrote about hiring his friends instead of people who actually knew what they were doing, because it felt good to be the boss who gave his buddies jobs. The pen kept moving. He wrote about spending money on an expensive office space because he wanted investors to think they were successful, even when they were burning through cash with no revenue coming in. About how he'd refused to change direction even when every sign pointed to the fact that his original idea wasn't working. About how his pride had been more important than his common sense. He filled page after page. The sun started coming up outside his window and he was still writing. About the fights with his co-founder. About how he'd been so focused on being right that he'd destroyed a friendship. About how he'd been playing the role of a startup founder instead of actually being one. When he finally put the pen down, his hand was cramping. But something had shifted. The pages in front of him weren't just a list of mistakes. They were a map of exactly what not to do. They were lessons bought with his savings account, his reputation, and 2 years of his life. Daniel read through what he'd written as morning light filled his small room. And for the first time in months, his mind felt clear. He'd been so busy feeling sorry for himself, so wrapped up in what everyone thought of him, that he hadn't actually learned anything from the experience. All those participation trophies on his shelf from when he was a kid. The perfect attendance awards, the honor roll certificates. They'd taught him that success was about being the best, about winning, about getting recognition. But they hadn't taught him how to fail, how to actually struggle and figure things out, how to put his ego aside and just solve real problems. He looked at his reflection in the mirror above his dresser. The guy staring back at him looked tired, defeated. But maybe that guy was more real than the one in the suit who thought he had all the answers. Daniel made a decision right there in that cramped bedroom. If he ever got another chance, and that was a big if, he would do everything differently. He wouldn't care about looking successful. He wouldn't care about impressing anyone. He'd just focus on actually helping people solve real problems, but first he needed a job. Any job. Because his parents were letting him stay here, but he could feel the strain it was putting on them. He could hear his father's heavy sighs, could see his mother making smaller portions to stretch the grocery budget. That afternoon, Daniel put on the one decent shirt he had left and walked to the shopping center down the street. There was a small electronics repair shop there, the kind of place that fixed cracked phone screens and replaced laptop batteries. A handwritten sign in the window said, "Help Wanted." The owner was a guy in his 50s who'd run the shop for 20 years. He looked at Daniel's resume and raised an eyebrow. "You worked at Preston Consulting?" he asked, naming one of the biggest firms in the country. "Yes, sir," Daniel said quietly. "And now you want to work here for $15 an hour?" Daniel could have made up some story. Could have tried to spin it into something that sounded better, but he was tired of pretending. "I started a company and it failed," he said simply. "I lost everything. I need a job and I'm willing to work hard." The owner studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Can you start Monday?" Daniel took the job. He didn't tell anyone except his mother. When relatives asked what he was doing, his parents would change the subject. His father still wasn't speaking to him much, and Daniel understood why. He'd been the family's success story, and now he was fixing phones at the mall. But something strange happened in that little repair shop. While he was there, helping small business owners fix their computers, replacing parts, troubleshooting problems, Daniel started noticing something. These shop owners, these restaurant managers, these local business people, they all struggled with the same thing. They'd come in to get their computer fixed and they'd complain about their systems, how they had to use one program for inventory, another for sales, another for customer information, how nothing talked to each other, how the expensive business software was too complicated and too costly, but the cheap apps weren't made for what they needed. Daniel would nod and fix their computers and listen. Really listen. Not like before, when he'd pretended to listen while actually just waiting to tell people his ideas. This time he just absorbed what they were saying. And slowly an idea began to form. Daniel kept the electronics repair job for 6 months. Every day he'd put on his work shirt, take the bus to the shopping center, and spend 8 hours fixing devices and listening to frustrated business owners. There was the woman who ran a small clothing boutique. She'd come in with her laptop and spend 20 minutes explaining how she had to manually update her inventory in 3 different places every time she sold something. "By the time I close the shop at night, I'm exhausted," she'd say. "And I still have to go home and update all these spreadsheets." There was the guy who owned a local hardware store his father had started 40 years ago. He'd shake his head and talk about how the big business software companies wanted $15,000 up front, plus monthly fees. "I can't afford that," he'd tell Daniel. "But the simple apps don't do what I need." There was the couple who'd opened a small bakery. They'd bring their tablet in for repair and mention how they were still tracking everything on paper because they couldn't find anything that worked for them. "We're bakers, not tech people," they'd laugh nervously. Daniel listened to all of them, and he started to see a pattern. These weren't huge companies with IT departments. These were regular people trying to run small businesses. They needed something simple, something affordable, something that actually solved their specific problems. At night, after his mother had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Daniel would open his laptop. Not the expensive one from his startup days that had been sold months ago. This was an old one he'd bought used for $200. But it worked. He started building something. Not a revolutionary platform that would change the world. Not something to impress investors or win awards. Just a simple tool that could help small business owners manage their inventory, track their sales, and keep customer information all in one place. No fancy features. No complicated dashboards, just the basics done well. at a price that made sense for a small business. $29 a month, less than what most of them spent on coffee. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. Not his parents, not his siblings, not his old friends. The only person who knew was his mother, and only because she'd peek in his room late at night and see him hunched over his laptop. "What are you working on, Beta?" she asked one night, setting down a cup of tea next to him. "Just something for work, Mom," he'd say. He couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't risk getting her hopes up again. Couldn't bear to see that look of worry if he failed one more time. It took him 4 months of late nights to build the first version. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. He created a basic website, nothing like the flashy one from his previous startup. This one was simple, clear, honest about what the software could and couldn't do. Then came the hard part. He needed people to actually try it. Daniel made a list of all the small business owners who'd come through the repair shop. He'd helped them fix their computers, so he had their email addresses from the invoices. He sat there staring at that list for an hour before he finally started writing an email. He kept it simple. Told them he'd built a tool that might help with the problems they'd mentioned. Offered them a free trial for 30 days, no credit card required. If they liked it, it was $29 a month. If they didn't, no hard feelings. He sent the email to 200 people and then closed his laptop. His hands were shaking. What if nobody responded? What if they all thought he was crazy? What if this was just another failure waiting to happen? The next morning he woke up to find 12 responses. 12 people who wanted to try it. Daniel couldn't believe it. He read each email 3 times to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding. Then he got up, got dressed, and started visiting each of those businesses in person. This was different from his first startup. Back then, he'd pitched to investors in conference rooms talking about market size and growth projections. Now he was sitting in the back of a small flower shop, watching the owner actually use his software on her phone. "Wait, so if I enter this sale here, it automatically updates my inventory?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said, watching carefully to see what confused her. "And I can see which flowers are selling best?" "Right there," he pointed to the screen. "That's your top 5 from the past month." She clicked around for a few more minutes, then looked up at him. "This is actually useful. This would save me hours every week." Daniel went to each of the 12 businesses that first week. He didn't just hand them the software and leave. He sat with them, watched how they used it, saw where they got stuck, noticed what features they needed that he hadn't built yet. At the hardware store, he realized he needed to add a way to track items by location in the store. At the bakery, he saw they needed a simple way to handle special orders. At the boutique, the owner wanted to be able to text customers when items they'd asked about came back in stock. He'd take notes on his phone, go home, and update the software. Then he'd go back and show them the changes. "You mentioned you needed this. Does it work the way you wanted?" Most of the time, they'd smile and nod. Sometimes they'd suggest a small change. Daniel would make it right there, sitting in their shop on his laptop while they watched. By the end of the first month, all 12 businesses signed up to pay. That was $348 a month. Not much, but it was something. More importantly, it was real. Real people paying real money for something he'd built because it actually helped them. He still kept his job at the repair shop. He needed the steady income, and honestly, he wasn't ready to bet everything again. Not yet. The fear of failure was still too fresh, too raw. But word started to spread. The flower shop owner told her friend who ran a gift shop. The bakery couple mentioned it to someone they met at a small business networking event. The hardware store owner posted about it in a Facebook group for independent retailers. Daniel didn't advertise, didn't do any marketing, didn't try to go viral or get press coverage. He just kept making the software better and taking care of the customers he had. By month 3, he had 30 customers, then 50, then 75. His mother noticed the change in him. How he'd come home from the repair shop and actually smile now. How he'd work on his laptop at night not with desperation, but with purpose. "You're building something again," she said one evening. It wasn't a question. Daniel looked up from his screen and nodded. "Yeah, Mom, but this time it's different." "How is it different?" He thought about how to explain it. "Last time I was trying to prove something. To everyone else, to myself. I was trying to be successful." He paused. "This time, I'm just trying to be helpful." His mother smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in over a year. She didn't ask for details, didn't push, just squeezed his shoulder and left him to his work. By month 6, Daniel had 120 customers and $1,500 in monthly revenue. He finally quit the repair shop. His boss shook his hand and wished him luck. "You're a good worker," he said. "Whatever you're doing next, I hope it works out." Daniel hired his first employee. Not a friend, not someone trying to break into tech. A developer he found through a coding forum, someone who'd also had a startup fail and understood what it meant to build something sustainable instead of something flashy. They worked from Daniel's bedroom, which was cramped and awkward, but neither of them cared. They were building something real. The growth wasn't explosive. It wasn't the kind of hockey stick curve that tech blogs write about. It was slow and steady, like water gradually carving through stone. Month after month, Daniel would add 20 or 30 new customers. Not because he was running ads or doing flashy marketing campaigns, simply because his customers told other small business owners about him. The couple from the bakery mentioned his software to the guy who owned the coffee shop next door. The coffee shop owner told his sister who ran a pet grooming business. She told someone at a trade show, and on it went, spreading through networks of real people who actually trusted each other. By the end of the first year, Daniel had 200 paying customers. That was almost $6,000 a month in revenue. After paying his developer and covering expenses, he was making about what he used to make at his first job out of college. Not the consulting salary, but enough to finally move out of his parents' house. He found a small apartment, nothing fancy. His mother cried when he left, but this time they were happy tears. His father helped him move his boxes, and as they carried the last one up the stairs, his dad put a hand on his shoulder. They didn't say much. They didn't need to, but Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't throw a party or post about it online. He just kept working. Because he'd learned the hard way that success could disappear as quickly as it came. And the only way to keep it was to stay focused on the people who mattered. His customers. Every morning, he'd wake up and check the support inbox first thing. If there was a problem, he wanted to know about it immediately. He'd respond to emails personally, usually within minutes. When customers called, they got him or his developer, not some automated system or outsourced call center. There was a woman in Ohio who ran a small bookstore. She'd sent an urgent email at 11 at night saying the software wasn't working, and she had to do inventory in the morning. Daniel stayed up until 2 a.m. figuring out the problem, fixed it, and sent her a message letting her know everything was good to go. She'd written back, "I can't believe you actually responded. At midnight. Thank you." That was the difference. That was why people stayed. His customer retention rate was 94%. For every 100 customers who signed up, 94 of them stayed month after month. In the software world, that was almost unheard of. But Daniel understood why. When you treated people like they actually mattered, when you solved their problems instead of just taking their money, they stayed loyal. One day, a guy reached out to Daniel through LinkedIn. He represented a competitor, a bigger company in the same space. They wanted to buy his customer list for $50,000. Just the list. The names and emails of all his customers. Daniel stared at that message for a long time. $50,000. That was more money than he had in the bank. More money than he'd made in the past year combined. He could pay off the last of his debts from the failed startup. Could finally start saving again. But those weren't just names on a list. They were real people. The flower shop owner who texted him photos of her daughter's graduation. The hardware store guy who'd invited him to his retirement party. The bakery couple who sent him cookies every Christmas. He wrote back, "Thanks for the offer, but I'm not interested." His developer saw the email later and asked if he was crazy. "That's a lot of money, man." "Those aren't customers," Daniel said. "They're people who trust us. I'm not selling that." Instead of chasing quick money, Daniel kept reinvesting everything back into making the product better. When customers asked for features, he built them. When they reported bugs, he fixed them immediately. When they suggested improvements, he listened. He hired a second developer, then a third. Not because he was trying to build a big company, but because he wanted to take care of the customers better. Each person he hired was someone who'd been through something hard, who understood that work wasn't just about getting paid. It was about building something that actually helped people. They still worked from Daniel's apartment for the first 2 years. 5 people crammed into a 2-bedroom place, laptops on the kitchen table, meetings in the living room. It was cramped and sometimes awkward, but nobody complained. They all understood they were building something different. There was no ping-pong table, no beer fridge, no beanbags or inspirational posters about disrupting industries. Just people working hard to solve real problems for real customers. By year 3, the company hit 800 customers across 15 states. Revenue was over $2 million a year. Daniel could finally pay himself a decent salary. He hired 2 more people. They moved into an actual office, just a small one in a business park. Nothing fancy. His younger brother came to visit the new office and seemed almost disappointed. "This is it?" he asked, looking around at the plain desks and ordinary chairs. "I thought tech companies were supposed to be cool." Daniel laughed. "We're not trying to be cool. We're trying to be useful." The thing was, Daniel had learned something from his failure that most successful people never learn. He'd learned that ego was expensive, that flashy offices and fancy parties and impressive titles were just ways to feel important. But they didn't actually help customers. They were distractions from what mattered. Every dollar he didn't spend on looking successful was a dollar he could spend on making the product better or keeping prices affordable for small businesses. His old consulting firm reached out one day. They'd heard about his company and wanted to feature him in their alumni newsletter. From consulting to entrepreneur, a success story. Daniel turned them down. He didn't want to be a success story. He didn't want to be the guy who made it look easy. Because it hadn't been easy. It had been terrifying and humbling and painful, and he didn't want to inspire people to quit their jobs and chase dreams. He wanted to inspire people to actually help others and build things that mattered. His parents came to visit the office. His mother brought food for everyone, too much food like always. His father walked around quietly, looking at the whiteboards covered in product plans and customer feedback. "You're doing good work, Beta," his father said finally. It was the first time he'd really acknowledged what Daniel was building. Not successful work, not impressive work, good work. That meant more to Daniel than any amount of money could. One evening, as Daniel was locking up the office, his lead developer asked him something. "What's the end game here? Are we trying to get acquired? Go public? What's the goal?" Daniel thought about it. A few years ago, he would have had a quick answer. Something about changing the world or building a billion-dollar company or disrupting an industry. But now he just shrugged. The goal is to still be here next year, helping the same customers plus a few more. "That's it. That's it?" The developer seemed surprised. "That's it," Daniel confirmed. "If we can keep doing that year after year, if we can keep helping these small businesses succeed, then we're doing exactly what we should be doing." It wasn't the ambitious answer most startup founders would give, but Daniel wasn't most startup founders anymore. He was someone who'd failed hard enough to learn what actually mattered, and what mattered was right in front of him. Real people, real problems, real solutions. Everything else was just noise. 5 years after watching his first startup crash and burn, Daniel got an email that would change everything. It was from a major enterprise software company, one of the biggest in the industry. They wanted to talk about acquiring his business. At first he thought it was spam. Companies like that didn't acquire small businesses run out of modest offices by people who'd failed before. But the email had real names, real titles, real phone numbers. So Daniel called back, more curious than anything else. The conversation started simple enough. They liked what he'd built. They liked his approach to customer service. They especially liked his retention rates. In an industry where customers jumped from one software to another constantly, Daniel's customers stayed. Year after year, they stayed. "We've been watching your company for a while," the executive told him over a video call. "What you've done is remarkable. You've built something real." They wanted to set up a meeting. Daniel agreed, still not quite believing this was actually happening. The number they mentioned during that first serious conversation made Daniel's head spin. $47 million. They were offering $47 million for his company. He sat in his apartment that night staring at his laptop screen, trying to process what that meant. His first startup had raised $2 million and imploded. This second company, built in a basement and run from a basic office, was now worth more than 20 times that amount. But it wasn't the money that got to him. It was the irony. The company everyone had believed in had failed. The company nobody knew about had quietly become worth millions. Daniel didn't make a decision right away. He spent weeks talking to his team, to his lawyer, to people he trusted. He visited some of his biggest customers and asked them what they thought. Not about the money, but about the company that wanted to buy them. Will they take care of us the way you do? The bookstore owner asked him. That was the question that mattered. Daniel did his research. He talked to customers of the company that wanted to acquire them. He learned about their values, their approach, their plans for his software, and slowly he realized that this might actually be good. The acquiring company wanted to keep his software running exactly as it was. They wanted his approach to customer service. They wanted his team. They weren't buying him to shut him down or merge him into something else. They were buying him because they wanted to learn from what he'd built. "We've lost our way," one of their executives admitted in a private conversation. "We got too big, too corporate. We stopped caring about individual customers." "You never did. We want to bring that back." Daniel called a meeting with his small team. 15 people now. 15 people who'd worked hard to build something they believed in. He told them about the offer, told them what it would mean. "Here's the thing," he said, looking around the conference room at faces he'd come to know so well. "Most of you have equity in this company. If we accept this offer, you all become millionaires. Every single one of you." The room went silent. His lead developer, the first person he'd hired, had tears in his eyes. The customer support person who'd joined them a year ago put her hand over her mouth. The young developer who'd just paid off his student loans looked like he might pass out. These weren't just employees. They were people who'd believed in something when it was small and uncertain. And now that belief was going to change their lives. The vote was unanimous. They'd accept the offer. The paperwork took months. Lawyers and accountants and due diligence and 1,000 things Daniel didn't fully understand but worked through anyway. And then finally it was done. Daniel stood in the office on the last day as an independent company. They'd organized a small gathering, nothing fancy. Just the team, some pizza, some drinks. His parents were there. His siblings. A few of the local customers who'd been with them from the beginning. The bookstore owner had brought a gift. It was a framed photo of her shop with a handwritten note. "You saved my business. When my husband died, I almost gave up. Your software helped me keep going. Thank you." The hardware store guy, now fully retired, had a similar story. "My dad built this store with his hands. I almost lost it because I couldn't keep up with the modern world. You gave me the tools to keep his legacy alive." There were more stories. The flower shop owner whose daughter had gone to college because the business stayed profitable. The bakery couple who'd been able to hire their first employee. The coffee shop that expanded to a second location. Daniel had to step outside for a minute. It was too much. These weren't just success stories. These were lives he'd touched. Real people whose days were better because of something he'd built. His father found him outside, standing in the parking lot, wiping his eyes. "You okay, Beta?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, Dad, I'm okay." His father stood next to him quietly for a moment. "You know what I'm most proud of?" "What?" "Not the money. Not the success." His father looked at him with an expression Daniel had never seen before. Complete acceptance. Complete pride. "I'm proud that you failed and got back up. I'm proud that you didn't let it break you. I'm proud that you learned." They stood there together as the sun set over the business park. Two men who understood each other better now than they ever had before. Inside, Daniel gave a short speech to everyone gathered. He didn't talk about the acquisition price, though everyone knew it by now. He didn't talk about being vindicated after his failure, though that would have been easy to do. Instead, he talked about the letters he'd received from customers over the years. Letters from people who'd kept their businesses running because of his software. People who'd been able to hire family members. People who'd avoided bankruptcy. People who'd achieved their dreams of being their own boss. 5 years ago, Daniel said, his voice steady but emotional. "I was living in my childhood bedroom, wondering if I'd ever do anything worthwhile again. I had failed at something I'd poured my heart into. I'd lost everything. I disappointed everyone who believed in me." He looked around the room at all the faces, and that failure was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it taught me that success isn't about proving people wrong. It isn't about being the smartest or the fastest or the most impressive. Success is about becoming someone worthy of a second chance and being humble enough to take it. His younger brother raised his hand like he was in class. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. When did you know you'd made it? When did you know you were successful again?" Daniel thought about it. Honestly, I still don't think of myself as successful. I think of myself as useful. There's a difference. What's the difference? Success is about you. Being useful is about other people. Daniel smiled. I spent my first 30 years trying to be successful. I've spent the last 5 years trying to be useful. And being useful feels a lot better. The party wound down. People hugged, took photos, made promises to stay in touch. Daniel's team would all transition to the new company, their jobs secure, their bank accounts transformed. Later that night, Daniel sat in his apartment one last time before moving to a house he'd just bought. He opened that old notebook from 5 years ago, the one where he'd written down all his failures at 3 a.m. He read through it again. Every mistake, every wrong turn, every moment of pride that had gotten in his way. Then he picked up his pen and wrote one more entry. I used to think failure was the opposite of success. Now I know it's just part of the path. Everyone who told me I'd thrown my life away was wrong, but I can't blame them for thinking it. At the time, it looked exactly like that. What they didn't see was what I was learning. What they didn't know was that I had to fail at being impressive before I could succeed at being helpful. He paused, thinking about everything that had happened, about the journey from that cramped bedroom to this moment, about all the people who'd helped him along the way, often without knowing it. The kid who got all the trophies and scholarships, he couldn't have built this company. He was too busy trying to prove he was smart. He needed to fail first. He needed to lose everything. He needed to become nobody before he could become somebody who actually mattered. Daniel closed the notebook and put it on his bookshelf, next to the framed photo from the bookstore owner. His phone buzzed. It was a text from one of his customers, a woman who ran a small craft store in Montana. She didn't know about the acquisition yet. Didn't know anything had changed. Hey, just wanted to say thanks. Had my best sales month ever. Your software made it so easy to track everything. You're a lifesaver. Daniel smiled and typed back. That's awesome. Congratulations on the great month. He didn't tell her about the millions. Didn't mention the acquisition. Because that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that her business was doing well. What mattered was that something he'd built had helped her succeed. The golden boy who'd failed spectacularly had become something better than successful. He'd become someone who made other people's lives better. And that, he'd finally learned, was the only kind of success that actually lasted. His mother called. Beta, are you okay? Are you happy? Daniel looked around his apartment, thought about the journey he'd been on, and smiled. Yeah, Mom. I'm happy. I'm really happy. Good. Come for dinner tomorrow. I'm making your favorite. I'll be there. He hung up and sat in the quiet for a while, thinking about how strange life was. How the path to where you're supposed to be almost never looks like you think it will. How sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. The failure everyone had pitied had built something worth millions. But more importantly, he'd built something that mattered. He'd helped people. He'd made a difference. He'd learned that being knocked down wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a better one. And that lesson, Daniel knew, was worth more than any amount of money in the world. 2 years after the acquisition, Daniel stood in front of a small crowd at a community college. He'd been invited to speak to a group of students in the business program, most of them older than traditional college age. People who were going back to school while working full-time. People who'd had setbacks and were trying to start over. He looked out at their faces and saw himself from 7 years ago. That mixture of hope and fear. That desperation to make something of themselves. A young woman in the front row raised her hand during the question period. How did you know your second business would work? Weren't you scared to try again after failing? Daniel smiled. I was terrified. Every single day for the first year, I thought it might fall apart again. But here's the thing I learned. I wasn't trying to know it would work. I was just trying to help people solve a problem. That's it. When you focus on actually helping someone instead of trying to be successful, the fear matters less. An older man in the back spoke up. I lost my business 3 years ago. Been working at a warehouse since then. My family thinks I should just accept that I'm not cut out for running a business. How do you deal with people not believing in you? Daniel nodded slowly. He remembered that feeling so well. My dad didn't speak to me for months after my first company failed. People at family gatherings avoided me. And honestly, they weren't wrong to doubt me. The person I was when I failed, that guy deserved to fail. He was arrogant, He thought he knew everything. He paused. But failure changed me. It made me humble. It made me listen. It made me care more about helping others than impressing them. So here's what I'd tell you. Don't waste energy trying to prove doubters wrong. Use that energy to become someone different. Someone better. Someone who learns from mistakes. A woman in her 40s asked the next question. Do you think everyone needs to fail to succeed? No, Daniel said immediately. Some people learn from watching others fail. Some people are naturally humble and don't need to be knocked down to figure things out. But for people like me, people who got a lot of early success and started believing they were special, yeah, I needed to fail. It was the only way I was going to learn what actually mattered. After the talk, several students came up to speak with him privately. Most of them had their own failure stories. A restaurant that closed, a degree they never finished, a career that didn't work out, dreams that fell apart. Daniel listened to each one and saw the same shame he'd carried for so long. That feeling of being less than, of being broken, of wasting time and opportunities. Can I tell you something? He said to a guy who'd just explained how his food truck business had gone bankrupt. Right now, you think your failure defines you. You think everyone sees you as the person who couldn't make it work. But 5 years from now, if you keep going, if you learn from what happened, that failure will be the most valuable thing on your resume. How can failure be valuable? Because it teaches you things success never can. It teaches you humility, persistence, how to actually solve problems instead of just looking like you're solving them. Success makes you confident. Failure makes you competent. And competent beats confident every single time. Daniel drove home that evening thinking about how strange his life had turned out. He'd wanted to be known as the smart one, the successful one, the impressive one. And now he was known as the guy who failed and figured it out. Young entrepreneurs reached out to him on social media asking for advice, not because he'd had some massive exit or built a unicorn company, but because his story felt real, because he'd been where they were, because he wasn't selling some fantasy about overnight success. His response was always the same. Build something that actually helps people. Focus on solving real problems. Forget about looking successful and just be useful. Take care of your customers like their family. Don't spend money trying to impress people. And if you fail, and you probably will at least once, let it teach you instead of destroy you. The money from the acquisition sat in his bank account, more than he could spend in a lifetime. He'd bought his parents a house, helped his siblings with their own goals, given generous bonuses to everyone who'd worked with him, but mostly he lived the same life he'd lived before. Same simple apartment, though now he owned it. Same morning coffee routine. Same focus on helping people. Because Daniel had learned the most important lesson of all. Success doesn't make you happy. Purpose makes you happy. And his purpose wasn't to be rich or famous or impressive. His purpose was to help people who were struggling the way he once struggled. To show them that failure wasn't the end. To prove that you could lose everything and still build something meaningful. The golden boy who failed had become something better. He'd become real. He'd become human. He'd become someone who understood that the path to becoming your best self sometimes requires first becoming your worst. And every single day, he was grateful for that painful journey, because it had led him exactly where he needed to be.